With each new Lorcana set, Ravensburger releases a number of different products. One of these product lines is a series of pre-constructed decks that Ravensburger refers to as starter decks.
So far, we've seen 9 of these decks, 3 in the first chapter and 2 decks in each subsequent set.
Now, most of these decks are still available on the market, so you can find pretty much all of them for MSRP if you want to give any of them a try.
But with 9 to choose from, which one of these decks is best for new players to pick up? We've ranked them from worst to best.
Now, we have to start by saying that this is a subjective list, of course, and none of these starter decks are truly bad. Each one is different, offers a different play experience, and offers something different to new players. And of course, every player's ranking of these decks is going to differ slightly.
But we think starter decks should be doing 3 things. First, they should teach the game mechanics. Second, they should be easy to play. And by that we mean they should be easy to understand the deck's script, or what the deck is trying to do to win the game. And then finally, they should be fun to play. We also gave bonus points if a deck introduced popular cards. You know, Lorcana is my first TCG, and I learned how to play using these starter decks. I've played all 9, and to me, some of them were easier and more fun than others. Number 9 from Ursula's Return, Stand Together.
Alright, I know this deck has a lot of defenders out there, and it's not a bad deck, but it has a couple problems. This deck leaves very limited margin for error for the new player. It requires you to rely on efficient trades using your hero synergies. There's very little card draw in this deck, the only one being Dig a Little Deeper, which is an 8-cost uninkable song which you really have to work to play. And one thing you'll notice is that we will criticize some of these starter decks when it doesn't give players some card draw, because top decking is just never fun, especially when you're new to a TCG. In this deck, your characters get better as the game goes on, and you build up more heroes with more synergies on the board. So for that reason, one of the best strategies is to just play characters on the board, building up a giant board state, and then questing for 20 lore at once with Ana. In a mirror match, sometimes you end up staring at your opponent across the board as each of you keep playing characters with neither one wanting to quest first. At the end of the day, this isn't a bad deck, but it's just not terribly fun to play. Number 8, from Into the Inklands, Plenty of Pluck.
This is a good deck, but it has to be piloted very well. There's an aggressive line, a ramp line, and some other interesting combos available to you, but you really have to know what cards you're trying to draw into for you to be successful. There is a little bit of card draw in this deck with Sumerian Talisman, but it is conditional on your characters getting banished during a challenge. There's also some interesting combos in the deck, like the Huey, Dewey, and Louie combo, but with only 1 copy of Huey, it's difficult to pull this combo off. I will say one cool thing about this deck, especially because it came out in Into the Inklands, was it really did synergize around locations, with cards such as Hey Hey, Voyage, Moana, and Vault Door. But with only 5 locations in the deck, it was really difficult to capitalize on this synergy. Overall, this deck does require some skill to pilot and can feel a little clunky if you have a bad draw. Number 7 from the first chapter, Daring and Deception.
I know this is a polarizing spot on this list because many people have very fond memories of it, and truth be told, it's not a bad deck. It has some fun lines of play, an Aladdin shift that can really swing the game, and plenty of evasives. In fact, get a couple pongos on the board and you can run away with this game pretty quickly, leaving your opponent without the ability to respond. It also has some removal with Dragonfire. This is just another deck though whose script isn't readily apparent, and the other problem is the card draw. It really has none other than Mad Hatter with 3 copies, and it leaves you in a position with this deck of feeling like if you don't draw Mad Hatter in the mid to late game, you're going to lose the game. Lorcana is a game that often requires you to ink a card and play a card every turn, so you can run out of your hand pretty quickly, and again, for new players, top decking is just no fun. Of course, we know managing your resources is a big part of any TCG, but new players really want to be able to play cards and experience the game before being forced into resource management. Overall, this is a decent deck, but not terribly beginner-friendly. Number 6, from Rise of the Floodborn, it's Tactical Teamwork.
This deck can be really fun if you get the right draw. If you get a handful of dwarves, you can send them off to work, and they work in a lot of fun ways together. This also teaches new players the importance of sequencing their actions. It also has a fun early shift combo with Queen Wrinkled Monarch, and it teaches players the insanity of the Popsicle Flaversham combo. While you only have 1 Hiram in this deck, you do have 2 Judy Hopps, and while she's only half as good, she does give you a card off an item. This deck could be better with a little bit more card draw, but Popsicle does give you some consistency. At the end of the day, this is a go-wide deck, and go-wide decks are great for new players. They're easy to understand. Speaking of going wide, number 5 from Into the Inklands, Dogged and Dynamic.
Now, this deck flip-flopped several times back and forth between the previous deck on this list, Tactical Teamwork. In fact, we played these decks against each other several times to get a better feel for them. The thing is, Dogged and Dynamic is just fun. In its essence, it's another go wide deck which invites you to put a ton of characters on the board. And it has some fun card draw with Pongo and Lucky and Tinkerbell all looking for characters off the top of your deck. Speaking of characters, 48 of the 60 cards in this deck are character cards, and so you're likely to find them off the top of your deck fairly often. You also have 2 copies of Strike a Good Match, allowing you again to look through the top cards of your deck. Using this card draw effectively can really allow you to flood the board and run away with the game. But it's not just low to the ground. It does have some late game finishers with Evasive Dawn Carnage, a 4/4 with 2 lore, or Robin Hood Daydreamer with 4 lore. It also has a bit of control with I can never say this card. Cloud Kicker. It also has a little bit of control with Cloud Kicker, a card that we've seen often in competitive play. And its Floodborn, Pluto Determined Defender is pretty decent, as is its shift target. Overall, this is a deck that's pretty easy to play and pretty easy to understand. Just get a lot of characters on the board. Number 4, from the first chapter, A Steadfast Strategy.
Okay, I'm sure people are surprised to see this deck so high. After all, there is no card draw. But here's the thing, it's easy to understand the script of this deck. It's a ramp deck. It wants you to play One Jump Ahead, Grandma Tala, and Mickey Mouse Detective to ramp your ink into big bad characters like Mufasa King of the Pride Lands, Simba Returned King, Maleficent Uninvited, and on the top end, Maui Demigod. There's really nothing better as a new player than dropping an 8/8 Maui on the board to win the game. Although there is no card draw, it does teach players that ramping off the top of your deck is similar to card draw. If I can give someone a deck and describe to them what the deck is trying to do pretty quickly, it's a good starter deck. Number 3 from Ursula's Return, Magical Magic.
Magical Magic may not be the best deck on this list, but it sure is fun to play and full of flavor. Although we do wish the number of magical cards in this deck was a bit higher, the ones that are in there do have some fun synergies. This is a deck that wants you to put characters on the board, control things with support and healing, and eventually overwhelm your opponents. And it does have some conditional card draw with Dolores and Julieta. Its Sing Together song, the 7-cost inkable Look at This Family, allows you to get 2 cards off the top of your deck, making it much better than the 8-cost uninkable Dig a Little Deeper in the other starter deck in this set. As a fan of Encanto, I found that this deck is fun for me to play even if I lose. It's the only starter deck with 2 characters of the same franchise on the cover and named after a single franchise, and honestly, they should do it more often. Number 2, from Rise of the Floodborn, Might and Magic.
Bouncing in at number 2 is Might and Magic. This deck is decently fun to play, but it does teach players some really important mechanics. First is Resist with Tiana and the Prince, but most importantly, Mouse Armor, which does some work in a starter deck format.
This is the Might part of the deck, and for the Magic,
it teaches you one of the most important combos in Lorcana thus far, the Merlin Madam Mim bounce combo. Madam Mim Snake, Madam Mim Fox, Merlin Rabbit, Merlin Goat, and Merlin Crab all see competitive play. Players can really benefit early from learning about this wizard duel combo. And whereas many starter decks only give you 1 or 2 copies of important cards, there are 3 goats in this deck. Overall, it's a decently fun deck to play and it's really educational.
Before we go on to number 1, if you're enjoying this video, please consider liking and subscribing. These videos take a lot of time to make and your support really means a lot.
And number 1 from the first chapter, The Heart of Magic.
This is one of the first starter decks that we played, and it's still one of our favorites. This deck is just fun to play, and it's really easy for new players. It's easy to understand what to do each turn. This deck curves really well with good cards at each ink cost. There's some great card draw with 3 copies of Friends from the Other Side, a card that's seen plenty of competitive play, Maleficent Sorceress, it has Be Our Guest to search for characters, it even has some discard recursion with Hades and Part of Your World. The Flotsam and Jetsam combo are a lot of fun and can allow you to run away with the game when they both get evasive. It has a fun Broom synergy with Broom and Mickey Mouse Wayward Sorcerer. It also has some princess synergy with Moana and a couple princesses. Speaking of evasive, it has Pascal as a turn 1 play, which is a card that we've also seen in competitive play. Rafiki is a fun removal option with his 3/3 rush for 3, who can then sing friends on the next turn. And at the top end, although you won't play him very often, the Dr. Facilier Floodborn is just super cool, and if you can get him on the board, it's a lot of fun. Overall, this deck just feels like it clicks, and although it's not as high-powered or strong as constructed decks, it still feels like it hums and clicks in ways that many of the other starter decks don't.
There's so much more we could say about this deck, but for us, it was an easy choice for the top spot. What do you think about this list? Let us know what your favorite starter deck is in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Sign off catchphrase.